Question: would it be incorrect to say that the statement "there is no one to save" is a non-dual view? No, I don't think that would be incorrect. I think it's valid to say there is no one to save. And you could say it is a non-dual view. I mean, you can find these non-dual teachers who would agree with that statement and say there is, but what they would say is there's no one to save because there is no self. And that's where, if you look at my non-duality videos, you'll see I disagree with that. That's not the way I look at it. But what I have explained in many of my videos is we have a higher self that exists in the spiritual realm. And in order to grow, the higher self sends an extension of itself into this material world. And that's what I call the conscious you. And the conscious you is pure awareness, it's neutral. And when I say pure awareness, what does that mean? Well, it really means that the conscious you doesn't have any characteristics in this world. It doesn't have any outer personality. And so in order to take embodiment in the physical body, the conscious you creates, in the process of descending into embodiment for the first time, it creates what I call the identity body, the mental body, the emotional body, and then it goes into the physical. So, as I've explained in several videos, what we do over time is we fill these three higher bodies, emotional, mental, identity, with various structures. I call them subconscious selves. And so then what can happen is that, as I've explained, we start out at the 48th level of consciousness out of 144. We can go up and expand our sense of connection with our higher self, or we can go down below the 48th level where we go into what I call the consciousness of separation, the illusion that we are separate beings. And once we go into this separation, we see ourselves as beings who are separated from our higher self, from our spiritual source, the ascended masters, God, however we see it. And this is what has given rise to all of these traditional religions, where they portray that we have a soul. And I'm not saying we don't have a soul, but the way I explain the soul is that's the contents of our three higher bodies, emotional, mental, identity. But those are contents, they weren't created by God, and we weren't sent here with that soul. They were created by the conscious you as it interacted with the physical world. And so once we go into separation, we are creating this, what is normally called the ego, which we could also call the ultimate separate self. No, it's an identity that sees itself as separate. And that means it sees that God and the spiritual realm is separate. It can't even conceive of a higher self, but even if you tell people that there's a higher self, they still see it as separate. It's way up there. The higher presence is up there and I'm down here. And that idea, or that experience that you are a separate being, is what gives rise to the idea that you can't enter heaven as a separate being, which is correct. The separate self cannot ever enter the spiritual realm. And this then gives rise to the idea that you, as a separate self, need to be saved. And that's why you have all of these religions, like fundamentalist Christianity. One day, if you declare Jesus to be your Lord and Savior, Jesus is going to come and save you and take your separate self to heaven where it cannot go, according to what Jesus said 2,000 years ago, where he said, only the man who descended from heaven can ascend back to heaven. That means only the conscious you that descended from heaven can ascend back to heaven. And that's why I explain in all of my videos that the essence of the spiritual path is to let go systematically of these separate selves until the conscious you can accept that it is one with the I Am Presence. It's not a separate being. So what the non-dualists have grasped is that the separate self, however they define it or explain it, cannot be saved. cannot enter the spiritual realm. And that is correct. I agree with that view. But what data and reason is, that means that when you overcome the separate self, there's no self. You go into the state of no self. Or you reunite with infinite awareness, become enlightened, whatever, however they explain it. But the essence of this explanation is that when you awaken from the state of separation, you disappear. You're gone. There's nothing there. Because there's either the separate self or infinite awareness, nothing in between. And that's what I have explained in all of my non-duality videos, that's a fatal misunderstanding, fatal flaw in reasoning. Because when you awaken from separation, you awaken to realize first that you are a connected being, because there is a higher self. That's the source of all of your intuitive experiences, even your sense that you exist, that you are aware, your awareness. And as you increase that sense of connection, you come to a point where the conscious you can look at Earth, can look at its entire journey on Earth, and it can let go of any sense that there's anything you want to do here, want to experience here, anything you ever identified with here on Earth. You can let go of that sense of identification. And then you reunite with, merge back into the I Am Presence. But the I Am Presence then doesn't disappear. It becomes an ascended master. And then you can continue to grow from there until you reach the Creator consciousness. In other words, it's not, as the non-dualists say, the purpose that you come into being in this world as a separate self, you experience all these things you experience as a separate self. Some of them deny reincarnation, others accept reincarnation. So you could potentially have thousands of embodiments, have all of these experiences, many of them suffering. And then the whole purpose is that one day you wake up and then you disappear back into infinite awareness. That's not the correct view. The correct view is that when you awaken from separation, you realize that you are a connected being and you have the potential to rise to higher and higher levels of consciousness in the spiritual realm until you reach the Creator consciousness. So you could say there is no one to save because the conscious you doesn't need to be saved. It just needs to reawaken to its true identity and merge back with the I Am Presence. And the separate self cannot be saved. I mean, that was why you could say it has a need to be saved, but it cannot be saved. And that's why I describe in my videos how you come to see these separate cells one at a time. And, conscious you separates itself from it. You see that, oh, this is just a self I've taken on. It's just like I put on an overcoat. And you decide to just let the self die. You just let it die. And every time you let the self die, you become more free, more connected, more aware of who you are, that you are not a separate being, you are not a material being, you're not a human being, you are a spiritual being. And therefore, the ultimate goal of growth on Earth is to become aware exactly what kind of spiritual being you are. Not come to the point where you suddenly disappear as a spiritual being. So there's a distinction between a separate self and the real self or the connected self, and we might say an individual self. And you're not meant to lose the individual self. You're meant to grow the individual self until you reach that ultimate level of consciousness that can be reached in our world of form.